I think it's important to have these types of episodes at least once a year. These reflective episodes where, you look back at all the momentum that has gotten you to where you wind up creatively at the end of the year, and just stop, take a look around, really take inventory of what you accomplished, what you didn't accomplish, recalibrate, and proceed with that clear mindset for the upcoming year. In my case, 2024. What's up, folks? What's going on? And welcome to the Spun Today Podcast, the only podcast that is anchored in writing, but unlimited in scope. I'm your host, Tony Ortiz, and I appreciate you listening. This is episode 252 of the Spun Today Podcast, first officially recorded episode of 2024, second episode of the year, as I re-released an episode last time about marathon running. It's a great interview, sit down that I had with a longtime friend of mine, Christy Medina. So definitely go back and check that out. Thought it would be fitting for, New Year's resolution, trying to get fit, trying to get in shape, trying to pick up a new hobby. So it was a fitting episode to re-release for those purposes. Also, life, as it does, threw my family and I a unexpected curveball towards the end and beginning of the year, health-wise, and that obviously becomes number one priority. So this episode, which is the 2023 Spun Today wrap-up show, I was intending to release last time, but because of that issue, I didn't, and you're getting it a couple weeks later. And also because the situation is ongoing, there may be weeks here and there where I'm not able to produce a new episode on my regularly scheduled bi-weekly timeline. But when and if that occurs, I'll definitely do my best to repurpose, remix, and remaster some previously released content, maybe repackage it differently, which is something that just generally I want to do a better job of the board, not just for promotional social media and stuff like that, which is where I see the bulk of that happening with other podcasters and counterparts and creatives and just like entrepreneurs and business folks. They not necessarily have to have a brand new piece of content to produce every single day or, whatever their schedule is, although obviously that's ideal. But you can have evergreen content, which is something that I'm applying more so from the writing space. If you write a book, it's not like you write it for sale for one day and then, 2 years later, folks can't read it for whatever reason. You know what I mean? It's evergreen. It's supposed to be forever. You can do marketing and repackaging and remastering and re-putting out of the content of fiction more so than nonfiction, but certain specific types of nonfiction. But you definitely do that within the writing space. And I think I've done that a bit within the podcasting space. Similar to other podcasters, especially around holidays and stuff like that when listenership goes down. But I just want to get more creative with it, more purposeful, instead of just regurgitating an older episode. Where feasible, I want to try to create new content from pieces of older content, if that makes sense. But I digress on that point. Just wanted to be transparent as far as that's concerned. This is definitely, as you all know, a medium for me to express myself, get my thoughts out there. It's cathartic and definitely good for my mental health in terms of things going on in my life, just generally. So I definitely will do my best to maintain that schedule. But like I said, what's going on is a higher priority for sure. But that said, let's get into this episode. In this episode, I'm going to recap and reflect on the top 5 Spun Today episodes of 2023. In this episode, I recap and reflect on the top 5 Spun Today podcast episodes of 2023. I also share some of my writing and podcasting goals for 2024, as well as reflect on the goals I had set for myself for 2023. Stick around for all that good stuff. But first, I want to tell you guys about a really great way that you can help support this show if you so choose. Then we'll jump right into the episode. Another way you can help support the Spun Today podcast and also upgrade that stale wardrobe of yours is by going to spuntoday.com/support and clicking on the banner for Stitch Fix. Once you do, you'll enjoy a $25 discount to your first purchase. And the way Stitch Fix works is pretty cool. I use it and I've never been disappointed. You'll set up a profile, you'll put in all the sizes for your clothes, as well as all the different brands and types of clothes that you like to wear. It's really simple and intuitive to set up. They'll show you pictures and pretty much give you a thumbs up or thumbs down option on if you would wear something or not. And you get to select all the brands that you already are used to wearing. With this information, there are thousands of passionate, trend-setting stylists will curate a Stitch Fix box for you. They'll send you 5 items that you get to preview before they mail it to you, and you'll get to select based on the image if you like it or not. If not, they'll replace it with something else. And if so, they'll mail it to you absolutely for free. You can try everything on, and you have a few days to send everything back or keep the stuff that you want to keep. Then you can use that $25 credit that I mentioned towards your purchase of those items. Again, to freshen up your wardrobe and also support the Spun Today podcast, go to spuntoday.com/support and click on my affiliate link banner for Stitch Fix and enjoy your $25 credit. All right, folks, the top 5 most listened to episodes of 2023 of the Spun Today podcast. Let's get into it. Starting off with the 5th most listened to episode of the Spun Today podcast is episode number 233, Tips from Creatives for Creatives, Part 2. Big shout out to that episode. And that episode is actually a good example of what I was speaking to earlier in terms of repurposing older content in more creative ways. So one thing that I have, which hopefully more folks listening will partake in this year, is a Spun Today questionnaire. It's a 5 questions aimed at writers and or creatives. Definitely don't have to be a writer, just someone who's into anything creative. It could be painting, it could be cycling, whatever it is that you're into that you like. I personally feel that creativity translates over a lot, if not most of the times. I can take a tip from someone who's a painter and apply that, a writing version of that to my own writing or podcasting, for example, whether it be from a discipline perspective or some sort of ritual or practice or just a mindset thing that I can borrow from a different type of creative outlet and apply it to my own thing. So the questionnaire, which can be found at spuntoday.com/questionnaire, is something I put out there. Anybody can fill it out. You can choose to remain to be anonymous or not. And if not, it's just absolutely free promotion here on this podcast, on the free writing session episodes that I put out, which is my more writing focused episodes, writing related, where I share tips and advice from other writers and share some of my own writing, etc. I also share the responses of these questionnaires. And if you're a writer out there, I say who you are, plug your Twitter or your website or your latest book, and I just read your responses to the 5 questions that I have there on my website, which are all related to your craft and what it is that you do and how you find enjoyment in it, how you find the discipline to actually do it when you don't have time to, questions like that, so on and so forth. 5 very easy, straightforward, open-ended questions for you to speak to however you see fit. So again, spuntoday.com/questionnaire. And in some of those older episodes, I would have 1 or 2 responses to this questionnaire. So what I did for this episode, which was again the 5th most listened to episode in 2023 of the Spun Today podcast, episode 233, what I did was, instead of just re-releasing those episodes individually and separately, I cut out the chunk that was just the questionnaire responses from a few different episodes, and I mashed them together, and I put out this new episode from that repurposed content. And it did fairly well. 5th most listened to episode in 2023. Shout out again to episode 233. Let me just share with you all really quickly the description from that episode, which was, in this episode, I share a throwback montage of 4 Spun Today questionnaires that have been submitted in the past. Why not have a single episode that centralizes all the tips, motivation tools, and tricks adopted by fellow writers and creatives? If you'd like to partake in filling out your own, check it out at spuntoday.com/questionnaire. Thanks again to Amy Marcello, a person who chose to remain anonymous, Joshua Robertson, and Elaine Almonte, which were 4 different folks whose questionnaire responses I reshared within this episode. So thanks again to those folks. And for anyone interested, definitely go back and check out that episode. The 4th most listened to episode of the Spun Today podcast in 2023 was episode number 230, titled The Fabelmans SpaceX Starship Launch. Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon axed from Fox and CNN. And based on that very creative title, and I say that sarcastically, in case that's not coming through, sure, you can tell the topics discussed during that episode. But here I'll share the description from that episode, which is interesting because for this episode, I tried out a program, this new podcasting, not new, but new for me, podcasting program called Cast Magic. Now, there's a few different ones like this. Descript is one that I've been using more so lately. There was at least one other that I tried out. Descript is one that I've stuck with. But something that Descript is lacking, which Cast Magic had, and I really liked and might revisit and consider using Cast Magic. But there's all these different types of tools, right, that assist with editing your podcast. So removing the ums and dead space, which would honestly take me hours to do for every single episode I've ever done. Even to date, you still have to do some, even after using some of these AI tools. But just for context, like 1 hour's worth of recorded content for me would take me a minimum of 2 hours worth of editing afterwards. So it takes a very, very, very long time. But using a tool, Descript, for example, which again, I am currently mostly using, you take the audio unedited, drop it into Descript, and it does a couple things for you. It cuts out, not perfectly though, so that's why I still have to go through it and re-edit certain sections, but it's definitely a time saver. But it cuts out large gaps of silence, so you can cut out anything. For example, you can tell it anything that's over 2 or 3 seconds worth of silence, cut it down to half a second. You can remove all the ums and stuff like that throughout the entireness of the audio. It'll also transcribe the episode for you, which is great for podcasts in terms of search engine visibility and things of that nature. You can create your own audiograms, which are little clips within Descript. You can do so with the other tools as well. It'll suggest 10 to 15 different clips for you, which are from those, similar, for example, to Headliner, which I use for that purpose. But within 10 clips, I might take 2 or 3 that I actually like, or that are fitting, or that make sense, and then I might create my own on top of that. But anyway, one thing that Cast Magic had as well was that it would create multiple versions of a description for you. You would write your own description, but it would also, just based on the content that you recorded, create a description for you. Also create a title for you and give you multiple different options. So I would look at those different options and create my own description based off that description, and it was really, really good for that purpose. And this is the description for episode 232, which was again the 4th most listened to episode of 2023. Welcome to the latest episode of the Spun Today podcast. In this episode, I dive deep into the highly anticipated semi-autobiographical film, The Fabelmans, which provides a unique insight into the life of legendary filmmaker Steven Spielberg. Next, I explore the historic SpaceX Starship launch, which, spoiler alert, ended in a fiery explosion. I share why it is still considered a successful mission and its implications for the future of space travel, making for a fascinating discussion that you won't want to miss. And lastly, I also discuss the recent upheavals in the corporate media industry, with both Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon being ousted from their respective networks, Fox and CNN. So it's definitely a doper I would say, for lack of a better word, description. Cast Magic also, for example, gave better timestamp. It gives you timestamps and tells you, at this time, this is when you started talking about, SpaceX. At this time stamp, this is when you started talking about the Fablemans. At this timestamp, you mentioned X, Y, and Z. It's system generated AI driven outputs, so it's not perfect. I might listen to it and be it's incorrect or just not fitting for the purposes of creating its own timestamp, for example. And then you just make, obviously, your executive decision from there and include it, not include it, do a different version of, so on and so forth. But all these new tools that are coming out are definitely great to try to use, implement, and treat them as what they are. They're tools to enhance the content that you're putting out. Definitely leverage them to save time, which is my main goal. Instead of now spending 2 hours on editing, I'll spend an hour, maybe 45 minutes even sometimes. And I'm sure as these tools get even better, that'll cut down that much more. But shout out again to the number 4 most listened to episode of 2023, which is episode 232. The number 3 most listened to episode of the Spun Today podcast in 2023 was episode number 231, a Night Out audiobook re-release. Now for the audiobooks, that's type of episode that I re-release that I do not do much to. I might re-record an intro and re-update the outro if it's especially one of my older short stories that I made an audiobook for. But if there are updates within one of the audiobook episodes, that's the extent of it. The actual content of the audiobook itself remains exactly the same. And A Night Out is the most recent short story that I wrote. It is actually the very first short story in my short story collection that I published this past year, titled Melted Cold, re-release of the audiobook in its original format, which was prior to being professionally edited. So there are some slight differences if you listen to this version of the audiobook versus reading the published version of the story in my short story collection, but definitely still and clearly worth a listen. Here is the official description, which, by the way, is going to be a stark juxtaposed description in comparison to the previous Cast Magic AI enhanced description. But this is the audiobook version of the short story A Night Out by Tony Ortiz. Not very captivating and eye-opening. But shout out again to the number 3 most listened to episode of 2023. Episode number 231, A Night Out audiobook. The number 2 most listened to episode of 2023 was episode number 229, Chris Rock's comedy special Selective Outrage and Marlon Wayans' comedy special God Loves Me. Definitely a shout out to both of those hilarious specials. The much anticipated first time Chris was going to speak about the slap heard around the world, at least within his medium of expression, which is stand-up comedy. So that was definitely highly anticipated. And then Marlon Wayans' special, which was essentially an entire hour about and around that same content, which was the slap heard around the world, which, just a quick refresher, was when Will Smith at the Grammys got up and slapped Chris Rock on live television for saying a very innocuous joke about his wife, Jada Pinkett. But Marlon structured very creatively, I thought, and showed a huge leap forward in his stand-up comedy, in my opinion, from his previous specials, but very creatively put together an hour that was super funny and restricted to this content of the slap, but also of anecdotal stories of him being in the unique position of knowing all 3 of the people involved, from Will Smith to Chris Rock and Jada Pinkett, and growing up with them essentially, both professionally and just in life in general, knowing them. And here is the official description. In this episode, I speak about watching 2 stand-up comedy specials, Chris Rock's Selective Outrage and Marlon Wayans' God Loves Me. My reaction plus some of my favorite bits. And that was the number 2 most listened to episode of the Spun Today podcast in all of 2023. Episode number 229. Chris Rock's comedy special, Selective Outrage, and Marlon Wayans' comedy special, God Loves Me. And now for the moment that I'm sure each and every one of you have been sitting at the edge of your seats for. Probably not, but makes me happy to think that there may be a universe out there where that visual is actually true. But the number 1 most listened to episode of the Spun Today podcast in all of 2023 was episode number 227, Growing Up Dominican. That was definitely a good one. It was a ton of fun making it. It was different for me in that it was the first time I ever recorded an episode with more than one guest at the same time. I've done, for example, multiple guests on an episode, but I've recorded each of their segments or chunks separately. Like, for example, my 9/11 episode, which I re-release yearly on 9/11, which is a collection of just reliving and recapping with some of the closest people in my life, from my father to my brother to my wife, my in-laws, my best friend, and just recapping with folks where they were on 9/11, what they went through, what their families went through, their thoughts reflecting on it so many years later, so on and so forth. But each of those folks, again, I record all those separately and edit them together later on. But this was the first episode where I ever had more than one guest at the same time. It was 4 guests, so 5 of us in total. So it was a little tougher to manage in terms of just from an audio perspective, different voices speaking at the same time. Sounds absolute shit on the receiving end as a listener. So you have to really monitor that carefully and give everybody their space to speak, but also not step on folks too much when they're, debating something or going off on a tangent or a rant. You don't want to cut off stuff like that. Making sure that, tuned in to what each and every guest had to say, and I asked follow-up questions and I engaged them, pulling other guests in that aren't speaking as much, getting my points across. So there's a bunch going on, but it was definitely a fun episode to record, a great learning experience for me, and clearly one that was enjoyed by folks because it was the number 1 listened to episode of 2023. And here is that official description. In this episode, I sit down and chop it up with 4 of my oldest friends. We share stories about growing up Dominican. Join us for discussions on having immigrant parents, mental health, raising children, gender roles within our culture, favorite Dominican foods, traditions, and much more. Shout out to Steven, Abby, Lionel, and Vinny, all of which made it a great episode with an array of varied interests and takes on things and specific topics, and just had an overall great time. Definitely looking forward to recording another one of those types of episodes, maybe even a Growing Up Dominican Part 2 with some of the same folks, if not all. And some folks that hit me up after listening to that episode and told me that they wanted to jump in at a bunch of points during that episode and, give their 2 cents of things that they remembered growing up, so on and so forth. So maybe definitely something to stay tuned for in 2024. But shout out again to the number 1 most listened to episode of number 227, Growing Up Dominican. So now let's speak about goals that I set in 2023 versus goals that I'm setting for myself in 2024. And of course, reflecting on if certain goals from 2023 were achieved or not. Let's start off specifically with podcasting. I set a goal in 2023 to increase my listenership or I set the goal rather in late 2022 when I did the recap for that year. But the goal I set for 2023 was to increase the listenership of my podcast by 50%, 50. And to make it even more difficult, it was based on the IAB stats versus the unique stats, which I broke down last year, was something that it seemed the podcasting industry was moving towards, but now it's still up in the air, still fractured. You have certain outlets that do track the IAB stats, which is meant to be this industry standard across the board. Because, if you look up stats in YouTube versus Apple versus Spotify versus your podcasting host, so on and so forth, they're all different. They all do it in their own way. So this IAB was meant to be something to standardize it all. But a lot of folks don't use it. The folks that do still also report their unique downloads. But that said, no matter which way you slice it, that goal of increasing listenership by 50%, which was, I'll admit, a very ambitious goal. The gall of me to try to strive for such a number. And also how it low-key underscores the fact that it must have half a dozen folks listening to this thing if I'm talking about 50% increases. But that goal was not achieved. Now, I had been consistently gaining at least 20 to 25% listenership year over year. So an increase of about 20% year over year. This year, for the first time ever in the 9-year history of producing the Spun Today podcast, listenership dropped. And it did so by 26%. That is definitely an L right there. Now, a bit of not even a saving grace, because I'm not including these numbers in, just because I'm not 100% certain if they're being counted into, if my host is counting them into my total stats, which is what I'm using to compare year over year, apples to apples, to make sure I'm always, comparing the right set of numbers to the same set of numbers year over year. But if I included my YouTube stats, which are tracked separately, which my host Libsyn is not counting according to my stats breakdown that I downloaded, and I count all my videos, which again is would be a little disingenuous to lump together if I did, which I did not, my videos and my shorts, because those are not all full episodes of the pod. Some of them are, like every episode is released on YouTube as well. But the vast majority are clips of those episodes. Like one episode might have 5, 6, 10 clips to it, both in like longer segments and also shorts that I release on YouTube, and all that gets aggregated separately. So it wouldn't be fair to include all those numbers into the total. But if a portion of them were, my stats would obviously be higher. If everything was accounted for and I compared it to my previous year's total in terms of downloads and listenership, I would have almost doubled my listenership. But again, it's not completely accurate mathematically to do that, so I'm not going to. What I am going to do, though, moving forward, is continue to track how I have always done year over year, which again, this year had a 26% drop in listenership. Let me hit myself again with that. But I'm going to also track my YouTube videos separately, my YouTube shorts separately, and then the grand total of all downloads via my host, which is Libsyn, which accounts for, if somebody listens on Apple, on Spotify, on a web browser, wherever it is that folks listen to an episode. And I'm going to aggregate all those together for a grand total, but I'm going to track them separately. So 3 separate columns plus a grand total column. So that next year when I do this again, it's going to have a pretty fair comparison year over year for all those separate categories. Another goal I set for myself, podcast related, was to continue to be creative and active in terms of adding posts and clips of different episodes on all social media platforms. I did continue to do that. So I would mark that goal as achieved, and I would add to it for 2024 to not only continue doing that, but to also add, there's a lot of the Reels content, the shorts, stories, etc. that I use on IG, YouTube, and so forth, that I can repurpose on the platform TikTok and see how it fares there, see if that drives traffic to the episode as a whole or not. Definitely worth a shot. So that is a goal that I would add for 2024. That is definitely within that lane of creating posts and clips for social media. I did have a goal in 2023 of customizing clips for each individual site. For example, creating motivational content for LinkedIn. And I would say I failed on that in that I didn't do it. I don't even really think that's a good idea to customize. Maybe I'm wrong. To customize the content per website as opposed to just creating the sub content, you know, like the clips and stuff like that, and just promoting it on all the websites to drive traffic towards your show. Because I think it could be a little bit misleading, right? If I do only motivational type content and post it on LinkedIn, then folks will go to the show expecting just motivational content if they're interested in that, and they'll wind up with a show that will definitely give you that motivational content, but also nuances and tips and tricks related to the craft of writing, breakdowns of movies, of books, current events, etc., which might not be what they're looking for. So I have the idea for 2024 to continue to try to expand in those other platforms like a TikTok or LinkedIn, but definitely not customizing them per site. And speaking of Cast Magic, which I mentioned earlier on, I did begin a LinkedIn in 2023 for Spun Today, but I only posted a handful of episodes on there. It's definitely something I have to revisit, but Cast Magic, for example, made that very easy. It created LinkedIn specific posts of your episode. So it's the same content, but just the sales copy, if you will, for it was formatted in a way that is more fitting to LinkedIn. That was definitely another plus of Cast Magic. So yeah, goal for 2024, I'd say, again, just to tie this out, to continue doing what I'm doing in terms of repurposing content, but also expand it to TikTok and LinkedIn much more frequently. I had a possible goal, tentative goal of increasing the output of episodes to weekly instead of bi-weekly. That's definitely still not feasible for me at this stage, but it's always a down the line thing that I do want to do someday, right? And the last goal that I had for the podcast in 2023 was to have 5 or more episodes this year that were interview episodes, like when I sit down and have a guest on. I would say that I failed that goal, although in the number 1 listen to episode, depends on how you want to break this down, I did have 4 guests technically. So if you want to be technical, you could say that I am 1 person shy of meeting that goal, because you did get 4 different people, 4 different perspectives, but on a singular episode, versus my intent, I guess, when writing this goal for myself, which was to have 5 separate episodes with 5 separate people in 2023. Because as you know, the majority of my shows are solo shows, this one, for example. But either way, whichever way you want to look at that, I still didn't meet that goal. I am going to revise the goal for 2024, and I'm going to specify at least 3 interview episodes, all of which are separate, just so we're not splitting hairs at the end of 2024. And those folks are my podcasting goals that I set for myself in 2023, as well as the goals that I'm setting for myself and for this podcast for 2024. And let's wrap up the show with my writing goals for 2023. Let you know how I fared with those and what my goals will be for 2024. So in prior years, I would set a shitload of goals for myself with the kind of mentality of, you know, these are all the things that I want to do. Not necessarily within a year, just stuff that I want to do and get done. But I'm going to put them out there to see if I can force myself to get them all done within 1 year, which was definitely not sustainable or doable. So for my goals in 2023, I got a bit more realistic, little more under promise, over deliver mindset. And I get myself 2 main goals, and we split the difference on those. The first goal was to submit my final draft for editing of my second novel, the continuation to Fractal. And on that goal, I fell flat on my face. Did not achieve. For the second goal that I had for 2023, it was to publish my first short story collection, which I am happy and proud to say, absolutely achieved and knocked it out of the fucking park. Melted Cold, available now. Definitely check it out and learn more about it at spuntoday.com/books. Now for 2024, in terms of writing goals, I'm going to set 2 for myself once again. The first one, which will just be a carryover of submitting my second novel for editing, of which, spoiler alert, I still have a long ways to go. I have at least begun to dig into it. And what I'm doing now, for example, is I know the type of story I want to tell. I know the topic that I want to dominate the majority of the story. And I know one of the storytelling devices that I want to use within this story. If that makes sense. I kind of don't want to give too much of that away. So I'm not going to get too detailed into that, which is a big improvement from where I was even a year, 2 years ago, which is not knowing the direction that I wanted to go with this. Kind of having an idea, but not having, just having zero momentum towards that idea. But now I have all that in place, as well as rereading my own book, Fractal, which is the part 1, which is a weird thing because I'm reading it now as a finished product, right? It's a published book that's out there that I do plan, by the way, on getting it professionally edited before putting out the continuation. So it's going to kind of be a re-release of Fractal, but a second edition version, and then the continuation of the story with the second novel in that series. But anyway, it's kind of weird and wild to read your own finished product, kind of just as a straight consumer. And there's certain things that I like about it, definitely a lot more things that I don't about it, which I guess is a good, healthy thing to try to, make myself want to improve. If I was sitting there just thinking, oh, this fucking guy's a genius, then there would definitely be something wrong with me. But I'm halfway or more through reading the book just to remind myself about everything and combing through things that I want to update for the second edition, but also scenes and places that I want to revisit from book 2 into book 1, which ties into my whole storytelling device that I want to use within creating the second book. So definitely much more momentum already from previous years. And that is, again, the number 1 goal that I'm going to set for myself in 2024, which is complete and submit that second novel for editing. And my second and last goal, which I'm going to set for myself, my writing goal for 2024, is going to be to record and put out the audiobook version of my short story collection, Melted Cold, which is different from the individual audiobook short story episodes that I've put out. For example, I'm going to do an official audiobook for Melted Cold that folks are going to be able to purchase and download from Amazon, Audible, for example. And those are my goals, my writing goals specifically for 2024. And I hope by this time next year, we are speaking about how I met and or exceeded those goals. And with that, folks, it is a wrap. That was episode 252 of the Spun Today podcast, the 2023 Spun Today wrap-up show. I think it's important to have these types of episodes at least once a year, these reflective episodes where, you look back at all the momentum that has gotten you to where you wind up creatively at the end of the year, and just stop, take a look around, really take inventory of what you accomplished, what you didn't accomplish, recalibrate, and proceed with that clear mindset for the upcoming year, in my case, 2024. thank you very much to each and every one of you who do take the time to listen. Hopefully you got something from this episode that you can apply to your own creative endeavors, or at the very least, I hope you got some enjoyment out of listening. With that, I will check you guys out next time. Peace. What's up, folks? Tony here. I hope you're enjoying the Spun Today podcast as much as I enjoy producing it for you. Here are a few ways you can help support the show. You can support the Spun Today podcast financially by going to spuntoday.com/support. There you will find a couple different ways that you can do just that, some of which will actually not even cost you a dime, such as using my Amazon affiliate link. When you go to spuntoday.com/support, you'll see my affiliate link to Amazon. Click on it and it will take you to Amazon's website, where you can do your shopping like normal. This will not cost you anything extra, but Amazon will pay me for driving traffic to their website. If you'd like to support the podcast more directly, you can do so by becoming a patron. At spuntoday.com/support, you'll also find my Patreon link. This is where creators such as myself can be paid directly by patrons like you. You can either make a one-time donation or schedule recurring donations if you so choose. There are also different tiers of support, and depending on which you decide to go with, you'll also receive some perks in return, such as early access to content, free digital copies of my books, free bookmarks, etc. That is, again, by supporting via my Patreon link, available at spuntoday.com/support. Similar to Patreon, at that same location, you'll also find my Ko-fi link as well as my Buy Me a Coffee link. They work very similar to Patreon and are different ways that you can help support the show financially. And last but certainly not least, you have the good old-fashioned PayPal donation button. Any which way that you choose to support is greatly appreciated. It all helps me do more of what I love, which is writing and podcasting. Again, go to spuntoday.com/support. You can also support the Spun Today podcast by rating and reviewing the show wherever it is that you're listening to this episode. I'd really appreciate it because it really does help. Also, follow me on all socials. At Spun Today on X, formerly known as Twitter. At Spun Today on Instagram. And at Spun Today on YouTube, where you'll not only find full-length episodes of the podcast, but also chopped up clips and additional content. And of course, you can follow the Facebook page at facebook.com/Spun Today. Another way you can help support the Spun Today podcast and also upgrade that stale wardrobe of yours is by going to spuntoday.com/support and clicking on the banner for Stitch Fix. Once you do, you'll enjoy a $25 discount to your first purchase. And the way Stitch Fix works is pretty cool. I use it and I've never been disappointed. You'll set up a profile, you'll put in all the sizes for your clothes, as well as all the different brands and types of clothes that you like to wear. It's really simple and intuitive to set up. They'll show you pictures and pretty much give you a thumbs up or thumbs down option on if you would wear something or not. And you get to select all the brands that you already are used to wearing. With this information, there are thousands of passionate, trend-setting stylists will curate a Stitch Fix box for you. They'll send you 5 items that you get to preview before they mail it to you, and you'll get to select based on the image if you like it or not. If not, they'll replace it with something else, and if so, they'll mail it to you absolutely for free. You can try everything on, and you have a few days to send everything back or keep the stuff that you want to keep. Then you can use that $25 credit that I mentioned towards your purchase of those items. Again, to freshen up your wardrobe and also support the Spun Today podcast, go to spuntoday.com/support and click on my affiliate link banner for Stitch Fix and enjoy your $25 credit. Do you want to start your own podcast? Have a great show idea that you want to get out into the masses but don't know quite how to get it from your head out into the world? Well, here's how. Use the podcast host Libsyn. That's who I use to bring the Spun Today podcast to you. And now you can use them the same way. Using the promo code SPUN, S-P-U-N, you can open up your Libsyn account today and get 2 months of free podcast hosting. Here's how it works. Once you record your show, you upload it to your Libsyn account, where you can fill in your episode notes, upload your podcast art, and schedule when you want your episodes to release. Once you do that, Libsyn will take care of the rest. They'll distribute your show to Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all the other podcatchers that you choose. instantaneously and seamlessly. Again, go to Libsyn.com and use the promo code SPUN, S-P-U-N, to get 2 months free. Or use the affiliate link that's in the episode notes. Again, that's Libsyn.com, promo code SPUN. Take that great podcast idea from out of your head and put it out into the world. And as always, folks, substitute the mysticism with hard work and start taking steps in the general direction of your dreams. Thanks for listening. I love you, Aiden.
I love you, Daddy.
I love you, Grayson.
I love you, Daddy.